with only 4,000 men before the walls of Pelusium. As Tabari reports, Amr Ibn al has confronted a question that would decide the fate of Egypt. Could so small an army force a gateway guarded by thousands? How could a commander rooted in Bedouin politics dare to prise open the Nile Delta against the May of Byzantium and its Egyptian garrisons? Failure meant more than a lost fortress. As Ibn al-Athir notes, if Pelusium held, the Muslim army would be bottled on the frontier, cut off from supplies and the fertile lands that would feed a future conquest. Egypt would remain a source of Byzantine power, the line to Syria would be threatened, and the reputations of the Caliphate and of Amr himself would be on the line. The choice was stark: press the siege and risk annihilation, or withdraw and concede the richest province in the east. The strategic picture was simple and brutal. As Tabari reports, Amr's army numbered 4,000. Ibn al-Athir offers a larger figure. 12,000 sources vary, but estimates range from 4,000 to 12,000 men under his command. Against them stood the defenders of Pelusium, al-Farama. At the eastern mouth of the Nile Delta, Tabari describes the city as strongly garrisoned and supplied from the sea. Ibn al-Athir records Byzantine forces in the region amounting to some 20,000. Other accounts mention many thousands. A reasonable working range, as the chronicles make clear, is between 10,000 and 20,000 defenders. Pelusium's geography compounded the danger. A fortified coastal citadel guarding the salt flats and approaches to the delta, where a small army could be hemmed in and overwhelmed. Amr's tactical reasoning, as the historians record, was not bravado but calculation. Tabari and Ibn Kathir both explain that taking Pelusium would open the delta's eastern approaches, deny Byzantium a naval anchor, and secure a lodgment from which to advance to Bilbais and Babylon, the arterial towns of the Nile. A rapid strike risked failure, a protracted siege risked attrition. Amr therefore chose to invest the city while detaching patrols to monitor the coastal roads and the passes to Sinai, seeking to force the defenders into a decision on his terms. Ibn al-Athir emphasizes that Amr tried to shape the battlefield. If the garrison remained cooped within walls, their supplies might dwindle. If they sallied, his mobile bands could exploit gaps. The human cost of that calculation showed almost immediately. Scouts returned with grim reports. The walls were strong, the provisioning uncertain, and the sea still under Byzantine control. Ibn Kathir records a moment, not theatrical, but painfully human, when Amr hesitated, weighing a retreat that would save his men but surrender the campaign. He slept little, his commanders debated. The chroniclers do not mythologize him here. They report a leader wrestling with exhaustion, the lives of his soldiers, and the will of his sovereign. When he committed to the siege, the payoff was partial and precarious. As Tabari recounts, the city endured pressure and supplies were tested. Yet the real test was not the stones of Pelusium, but the larger chessboard. What neither the besiegers nor the besieged knew with certainty was this: a new Byzantine movement was stirring forces in Egypt's interior, and a fleet on the Mediterranean that might yet tip the scales. Would Amr's gamble hold long enough for fortune to turn in his favor? Or would the sea and the inland roads bring a relief force that would crush his small army between hammer and anvil? EVNTSCOVID. Siege of Pelusium, Amr ibn al-Aziz's decision to besiege Pelusium. The Muslim army had been marching for weeks, pushing south from Palestine into a land none of them knew. Amr ibn al-Az, leading a force of only 4,000 men according to Ibn Kathir's account, was not marching to meet an army, but to confront an empire. His orders from the Caliph Amr ibn al-Khattab were to enter Egypt, a land of immense wealth and ancient power, held by the Byzantine Empire. The stakes could not have been higher. Failure here did not mean retreat to Arabia. It meant annihilation in a foreign land. Egypt was a fortress, the breadbasket of Constantinople, defended by a vast network of garrisons and the formidable fortress of Babylon at its heart. If Amr failed, the entire southern flank of the Muslim conquests would be exposed, and the momentum that had carried the armies from Yarmouk to Jerusalem would be shattered. The dream of expanding the dominion of Islam would grind to a halt at the gates of the Nile. Amr's strategy, as described by Tabari, was one of relentless momentum and calculated risk. He bypassed fortified coastal cities, knowing his small force could not sustain a siege. His goal was the fertile heartland, to strike at the economic and spiritual core of Byzantine power in Egypt. He moved fast, reaching the town of Al-Arish without resistance. But the real challenge lay ahead at Al-Farama. Here, the Byzantine commander, a man named Arishan, had mustered a significant force to block the coastal road. Historical sources vary on the exact number, but Ibn al-Athir suggests it was several thousand, likely outnumbering the Muslim vanguard. Amr faced a choice: a costly frontal assault on a prepared defense, or a maneuver that might expose his army. In a moment that reveals the weight of command, Amr chose neither. As recorded by Tabari, he did not commit his entire force. Instead, he sent forward a strong detachment to engage Arishan's army directly, pinning them down. This was the moment of crisis and doubt. By dividing his already outnumbered troops, Amr risked the destruction of both his columns if the Byzantine commander was stronger than reported, or if reinforcements arrived. He was gambling the entire campaign on the discipline of his men and the accuracy of his scouts' reports. The battle at Al-Farama was fierce, but the Muslim detachment held. The resolution was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, the whispers, that would define this campaign. While the Byzantines were fixed on the battle at Al-Farama, Amr, with the remainder of his force, executed a wide, sweeping flanking movement. He emerged not to attack the Byzantine rear, but to bypass them entirely, cutting their lines of communication and supply to the deeper provinces. The tactic worked perfectly. The news of a Muslim army now operating freely behind their lines spread panic faster than any cavalry charge. Arishan's army, still intact but strategically isolated and demoralized by rumors of their own encirclement, lost its will to fight. They abandoned their positions in disarray, and the road to the Nile Delta was suddenly open. But as Amr Ibn al-As surveyed the open delta before him, a new and more daunting reality came into focus. The real power of Byzantium in Egypt was not in its field armies, but in stone and mortar. Looming ahead, where the Nile forked, was the immense fortress of Babylon, a citadel manned by thousands and supplied indefinitely by river. To take Egypt, he would have to besiege the unbreakable. And the reports from his scouts carried another, more urgent warning. The Byzantine general Theodore was not idly waiting behind those walls. He was gathering every soldier from the provinces, forging a new army in the shadow of the pyramids, and he was almost ready to march. EVNTSCOVID. Advance into Egypt, battle and strategic maneuver at Al-Farama. In the year 641 CE, the city of Babylon, located near the banks of the Nile, became the epicenter of a struggle that would determine the fate of Egypt. Amr Ibn al-As, the commanding general of the Rashidun army, stood at the helm of a force that, according to Ibn al-Athir, numbered between 4,000 and 12,000 men. Facing them was the Byzantine garrison of Babylon, bolstered by Egyptian reinforcements estimated by Tabari to be between 20,000 and 40,000 strong. The stakes could not have been higher. If Amr failed, the conquest of Egypt would be set back, and the momentum of the Islamic expansion would be crippled. Amr ibn al knew that a direct assault on the heavily fortified city of Babylon would be suicidal. The city was strategically placed near the Rosetta branch of the Nile, its walls reinforced and its defenses formidable. The Byzantine general, Demetrius, had prepared meticulously, ensuring that the city's supplies and morale were high. Amr's challenge was clear. He needed to outmaneuver a larger, entrenched enemy in a terrain that favored the defenders. His solution was both audacious and brilliant. According to Ibn Kathir, Amr ordered his men to dig a canal from the Nile to the city walls. This canal, which would later be known as the Canal of the Commander of the Faithful, was designed to flood the city's defenses and create a new front for the Islamic forces. The tactic was risky. It required time, resources, and precise execution. But Amr saw an opportunity where others saw only impregnable walls. As Tabari recorded in his Tariq, the digging of the canal faced immediate setbacks. The Byzantine forces launched sorties to disrupt the work, and the physical toll on Amr's men was immense. According to Ibn al-Athir, Amr himself worked alongside his soldiers, digging through the hard earth under the scorching sun. The men grew weary, and doubts began to creep in. Would the canal be completed in time? Could they hold off the relentless Byzantine counterattacks? Amr's response was unyielding. He reinforced his troops with fresh units and ordered nighttime digging to avoid Byzantine arrows. The canal inched closer to the city walls, and the Nile's waters began to seep through, softening the ground beneath Babylon's defenses. The Byzantine general, realizing the danger, sent envoys to negotiate, but Amr, sensing victory, refused any terms short of unconditional surrender. As the canal neared completion, the Nile's waters surged through, undermining the city's foundations. The walls crumbled in sections, and the Islamic forces poured in, their morale soaring. The Byzantine defenders, caught off guard by the sudden collapse of their defenses, were overwhelmed. The city fell, and the Islamic army secured a decisive victory in Egypt. But the fall of Babylon was not the end of Amr's challenges. News reached him that a new Byzantine army was gathering in the north, intent on reclaiming Egypt. The war was far from over, and Amr knew that his next move would determine whether Egypt would remain under Islamic rule or slip back into the hands of the Byzantines. EVNTSCOVEID, the siege of Babylon, construction of the Canal of the Commander of the Faithful, fall of Babylon. As the Caliphate's grip tightened on the newly conquered lands, a storm brewed not on the battlefield, but within the heart of the nascent state. Amr ibn al, fresh from his triumphs, found himself facing a different kind of enemy, the suspicion of his superiors. The whispers reached Medina, carried by those who envied his swift rise and the vast territories he brought under Muslim rule. The Prophet's successor, Abu Bakr, had entrusted him with a weighty command, but now, under the second Caliph, Amr ibn al-Khattab, a shadow of doubt fell. The Caliphate's treasury, depleted by constant warfare, became a focal point. Amr, a man of stern judgment and meticulous accounting, felt Amr's expenditures were too high, his campaigns too costly. The risk was immense. If Amr's displeasure led to Amr's dismissal, the hard-won gains in Egypt could be jeopardized. The Byzantine Empire, though weakened, still held strategic outposts, and internal dissent could shatter the fragile unity of the Muslim armies. Amr's strategy had always been one of aggressive expansion, pushing the boundaries of Islam with bold strokes. But such boldness often came with a price, and the careful financial stewardship demanded by Yuma was a constraint Amr had not fully anticipated. The critical moment arrived with a terse missive from Medina. The Caliph demanded an accounting of Amr's wealth, and rumors circulated that Yuma suspected Amr was amassing a personal fortune from his conquests. As Tabari recounts in his Tariq, the Caliph's concern was not solely financial. He also worried that Amr's immense power and wealth might foster an independent spirit. The demand was a test, a subtle challenge to Amr's loyalty and his very authority. The strategic implication was clear. Amr had to prove his innocence and his continued subservience, or risk losing everything. He was in the city of Fustat, a testament to his earlier conquests, but now felt like a gilded cage. Amr, a man accustomed to the clash of swords and the roar of battle, found himself in an unfamiliar predicament. He was a warrior, a strategist, not an accountant. The historical sources do not record his immediate feelings, but the weight of the Caliph's scrutiny must have been immense. Ibn al-Athir notes that Yuma was known for his strictness and his deep concern for justice. Amr knew he had to respond not just with words, but with a decisive action that would silence the critics and reaffirm his commitment to the caliphate. His tactical reasoning was to demonstrate that his wealth was not personal gain, but a reflection of the caliphate's prosperity and his own effective governance. Amr's response was as strategic as any battlefield maneuver. He gathered the wealth he possessed, not to hide it, but to present it openly. He then led a delegation of prominent Muslims from Egypt to Medina. Upon their arrival, he declared his wealth before Caliph Yuma, detailing its origins and expenditures. He explained that his gains were for the benefit of the state and its soldiers, not for personal enrichment. He emphasized that his primary concern was the welfare of the Muslims and the expansion of their dominion. As Ibn Kathir records in Al-Bidayah wa al-Nihaya, Yuma's stern demeanor softened upon hearing Amr's explanation and witnessing the corroboration from the Egyptian delegation. The Caliph, satisfied that Amr had acted with integrity, rescinded his suspicions. However, this resolution brought a new, unforeseen challenge. While Amr had successfully navigated the Caliph's rebuke, the political maneuvering in Medina had sown seeds of doubt. The Caliph, though appeased, was now acutely aware of the potential for discord within his leadership. And as Amr prepared to return to Egypt, a different kind of message began to circulate, not from Medina, but from the north, speaking of renewed Byzantine activity and a formidable fleet gathering on the horizon. Evntscovid. Amr ibn Alas faces scrutiny from Caliph Yuma over his wealth and expenditures. Amr presents his case and wealth to the Caliph. Renewed Byzantine naval threat emerges. With an army sources give as no fewer than 4,000 and as many as 12,000 men, Amr ibn al has set out from the Nile's mile-thick heart toward the Mediterranean and across between 2 and 3 days of true desert. As Tabari records, the size of his force is reported differently in the chronicles. Ibn al-Athir lists comparable figures, and so historians must treat the numbers as a contested range rather than a certainty. If Amr failed, Egypt, the granary, and the coastal key would remain in Byzantine hands. Ibn Kathir and Ibn Khaldun both make plain the stakes. Alexandria was the gateway to the Mediterranean, and the loss of the Delta would imperil the nascent Muslim polities, supply lines, and prestige. The city's garrison, by the same classical accounts, was far larger by every measure available to contemporaries. Sources vary, but estimates range from some tens of thousands on the Byzantine side to figures reaching into the 20,000 40,000 bracket. Tabari. Ibn al-Athir. The terrain between Fustat and Alexandria is not a single straight road, but a gauntlet of sand ridges, marshy lagoons, the Merotes lakes, and the shifting mouths of the Nile. As Ibn al-Athir notes, Amr's strategic problem was not only enemy numbers, but geography. A slow advance down the riverbank would allow Byzantine forces concentrated in Alexandria to be reinforced from the sea. A coastal march risked supply shortfalls in desolate country. Al-Tabari reports Amr's calculation plainly. Speed would beat consolidation. He chose a route that cut westward across drier ground, accepting 3 days of hard marching to threaten Alexandria before the Byzantines could gather their full strength. Tactically, Amr divided risk against risk. Ibn Kathir records that he sent detachments to secure wells and forage, while keeping his main body compact and mobile, a decision born of necessity rather than boldness. He aimed to force the Byzantines to make a choice: sally forth into the open desert or remain behind Alexandria's walls and risk a siege of their own provisioning lifelines. That calculus was his compass. Every command was measured against it. Then came the human crisis. Scouts returned with news that supplies were thin, that some men staggered from thirst, and that local guides could not always find safe tracks through the salt flats. As al-Tabari reports, Amr paused and called a council. Ibn al-Athir emphasizes the weight of that moment. He faced a stark choice: consolidate at Fustat and wait, risking the Byzantines striking first, or press on with exhausted troops in hopes of surprise. The sources make clear he felt the burden. This was not swagger, but calculation under pressure. The gamble paid an initial reward. Ibn al-Athir records that the rapid approach surprised the defenders. Detachments secured watering points and cut short the coastal road. Alexandria, alarmed, pulled its forces within its walls and relied on its fleets. According to Ibn Kathir, the city's commanders began to fear being trapped between Amr on land and the uncertainties at sea. But the true test loomed beyond the walls. The sea remained in Byzantine hands, and the threat of a Byzantine relief, whether by fleet or by troops gathering in the Delta, was real. As al-Tabari and Ibn al-Athir both note, Amr now faced a new question that no desert march could answer: how to overcome a city defended by walls and supplied by a hostile sea. EVNTSCOVID. Amr's 3-day desert march toward Alexandria, approach and tactical maneuvers to cut supply lines, the strategic pause and decision under supply stress. In the year 37 AH, the Muslim world was torn apart. At Siffin, Amr ibn al-As, the scarred lion of conquest, now faced his greatest test. Al-Tabari reports in his Tariq that Ali ibn Abi Talib's army swelled to around 90,000 warriors, while Muawiyah's forces, with Amr as his chief strategist, stood at approximately 70,000 men. The stakes could not be higher. If Amr's strategy failed here, Muawiyah's claim to the caliphate would collapse, plunging the Ummah into endless civil war. The unity forged by the Prophet Muhammad was at the brink of shattering forever. For weeks, the armies faced each other across the Euphrates. Amr, drawing on decades of military experience, advised Muawiyah to avoid a direct frontal assault against Ali's larger, motivated force. Instead, he proposed a war of attrition, using the river to control supply lines and weaken enemy morale. As Ibn al-Athir recorded in Al-Kamil fi al-Tariq, Amr understood that time was on their side. Ali's coalition was fragile, while the Syrians were united under Muawiyah. When battle seemed inevitable and casualties mounted, Amr made a calculated move. He suggested that Muawiyah's soldiers raise copies of the Quran on their spears, calling for arbitration according to God's book. This was not surrender, but a masterstroke to pause the fighting and shift the conflict to a political arena where Amr's diplomatic skills could shine. But as Tabari notes, Amr hesitated. The call for arbitration was a gamble. It risked demoralizing their own troops who were eager for victory, and it handed initiative to Ali. In private councils, Amr voiced his concerns. Would the arbitration truly resolve the conflict or merely postpone the bloodshed? He carried the weight of knowing that every decision now would be scrutinized by history, and the very community he had helped build was tearing itself apart. The arbitration at Athir proceeded. Amr, representing Muawiyah, faced Abu Musa al-Ash'ari for Ali. Through shrewd negotiation, Amr secured an outcome that effectively nullified Ali's authority without conceding defeat. As Ibn Kathir describes in Al-Bid'ah wa al-Nihaya, Amr outmaneuvered Abu Musa in the final declaration, ensuring that Muawiyah's position was strengthened. The tactical pause at Siffin had bought the time needed for this political victory, but it came at a cost. The Muslim community was now irrevocably divided. But the peace was fragile. As Amr returned to Damascus, news arrived that the Kharijites, rejecting both Ali and Muawiyah, had mobilized a new army. They saw the arbitration as a betrayal of Islamic principles. Now Amr Ibn al-As, the master of strategy, faced an even more fanatical enemy. And in Egypt, the province he once conquered, unrest was brewing, a rebellion that would demand his ruthless attention once more. EVNTSCOVID, Battle of Siffin, arbitration at Athir.